I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked in. The table was set too perfectly. Mum's good china, the silverware polished to a spiteful shine. Clara's favourite rosemary bread warming in the basket. All the little details that scream, this isn't just dinner, this is a performance. But I was too busy pretending not to notice the way Mum's smile didn't reach her eyes when she hugged me, or how Dad's grip on my shoulder lingered a second too long, like he was steadying himself for what came next. Clara was already glowing, of course. She always did when she was the centre of attention, perched at the head of the table like a queen holding court, her fiancé Mark beside her, smirking like he'd already won something. I'd met him twice before. Both times he'd accidentally brushed his hand against my lower back when we hugged. Both times my parents hadn't noticed. We made it through the salad course before the trap sprung. Mum cleared her throat, that delicate little sound she used when she was about to drop a bomb wrapped in lace. Emily, sweetheart, we've been thinking. A pause, a glance at Dad. About the lakehouse. I should have put my fork down. I should have braced myself. Instead, I took another bite of arugula and let the bitterness sit on my tongue. What about it? Dad didn't bother with preamble. We've decided it should go to Clara. The words hung there ugly and blunt. No, what do you think? Just decided. Like my name had never been on the deed. Like my childhood summers there, skinning my knees on the dock, learning to swim in that icy water. Hadn't happened. Clara's hand fluttered to her chest. Oh, don't look like that. It's just, Mark and I, we want to start our lives there. Raise a family. Her voice dipped into that saccharine whisper she used when she was playing understanding sister. You're always so independent. You don't need it like I do. Mark chose that moment to lean in, all faux concern. Yeah, you've got your own thing going. This'll be like a fresh start for us. I stared at him. Like we were friends. Like he hadn't just reduced 27 years of being sidelined to you've got your own thing going. The room tilted. Mum was nodding along, patting my wrist like I was a dog about to bolt. Dad was cutting his steak with methodical precision, avoiding my eyes. And Clara was watching me with this faint, pitying smile, like she was already rehearsing how she'd tell this story later. Poor Emily. She took it so hard. I finally found my voice. So, let me get this straight. You called me here, not to ask, not to discuss, just to inform me that my share of the family property is now Clara's. A beat of silence, then Dad cold as a judge passing sentence. It's what's best for the family. And that's when I laughed, actually laughed. Because that was the line they'd settled on. After years of Clara's ballet recitals trumping my science fairs, of her delicate constitution excusing every tantrum while I was told to be the bigger person, now they cared about what was best for the family. I stood up. The chair screeched against the hardwood. Clara flinched. Good. Here's what's best, I said, grabbing my coat. Next time you want to cut me out of something, don't bother inviting me to dinner first. The door slammed behind me. Nobody followed. Funny how quiet betrayal is when it's finally out in the open. I didn't storm out. Not yet. That was their first mistake, thinking I'd just take it and leave. That I'd swallow this like every other slight, every other time they'd handed Clara what should have been mine without a second thought. But this wasn't a forgotten birthday or a graduation they'd skipped for her vacation. This was the lakehouse, the one place I'd ever felt like I belonged. So I turned back. The dining room froze when I reappeared in the doorway. Clara's fork hovered midair, a bite of salmon dripping onto her plate. Dad's jaw tightened. Mum's smile flickered like a dying light bulb. You didn't actually think that was it, did you? My voice came out eerily calm. Mark, bless his useless soul, actually chuckled. Come on, Em, don't be dramatic. Shut up! I didn't even look at him. This wasn't about him. This was about the 3 people at this table who'd spent my life treating me like an afterthought. I want to hear it from you. I locked eyes with Dad. Look me in the face and tell me why. A muscle twitched in his temple. We explained already. No, you declared. I stepped closer, my heels clicking like a countdown. Clara wants it. Clara needs it. What about what I want? Or does that not matter? Mum made a wounded noise. Emily, that's not fair. Fair? The word tore out of me, sharp as broken glass. You want to talk fair? Fine. Let's talk about how Clara got a car for her 16th birthday while I got a gift card because you're so practical, sweetheart. Let's talk about how you flew cross-country for her college roommate drama but couldn't be bothered to show up when I won state for debate. My chest burned. Or better yet, let's talk about how the one thing Grandma left both of us is suddenly only yours to give away. Clara's chair scraped back. That's not... Don't. I finally looked at her, and something in my face made her shrink back. You don't get to play victim here. You knew. Silence. Dad broke it, his voice like gravel. This isn't up for discussion. And there it was. The truth laid bare, not a misunderstanding, not an oversight, a choice. I nodded slowly. You're right. It's not. I reached for my wine glass, Mum's favourite crystal, the set she only brought out for special occasions, and drained it in one go. But here's the thing about choices, Dad. They go both ways. The glass hit the table with a clink. Clara jumped. Mum's eyes welled up, not with guilt, no, with inconvenience, like I was a tantrum-throwing toddler ruining her perfect dinner. Emily, please, can't we just... No, I smiled then, all teeth. You don't get just anymore. I left the second time with my head high. No slamming doors, no screamed insults. Just the quiet, irrevocable sound of a daughter walking away for good. Let them chew on that silence. The lawyer's office smelled like lemon polish and regret. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I wanted to watch them squirm when they walked in and found me already there, cool and composed in the leather chair that squeaked under my weight. Dad entered first, his tie too tight around his throat. Mum fluttered behind him like a nervous bird, clutching her purse like it might fly away. Clara came last, arm looped through marks, her smile too bright for the sterile room. The papers sat between us on the mahogany desk, crisp and accusing. We don't have to do this today if you're not ready, Mum offered, her voice thin with false mercy. I almost laughed. Not ready? They'd given me exactly 48 hours to think it over, as if 2 days could undo a lifetime of being second best. I picked up the pen. It was heavier than it should have been. Emily, Dad started, then stopped. For once, he didn't seem to know what to say. Good. Clara leaned forward, her perfume cloying. It's not like you're losing anything. You never even liked going there. That was the thing about Clara. She could rewrite history with a blink. Never mind the summers I'd spent curled up in the boathouse loft with my books, or the way I taught myself to skip stones on the lake while she sulked about the lack of cell service. In her mind, if she didn't value it, neither could I. Mark nudged the papers closer. It's just a signature. I looked at him, really looked, at the way his pinky finger tapped impatiently against the desk, at the smug tilt of his mouth like he'd already won. And suddenly, it was also clear. This wasn't about Clara. This was about him. About the way he'd eyed the property the first time they'd visited, calculating its worth, about how he'd whispered in her ear until she'd whispered in theirs. The pen hovered over the line. Mum held her breath. Dad's knee bounced under the table. Clara's nails dug into Mark's arm. I signed. The scratch of ink was deafening. Clara exhaled, her shoulders dropping like she'd been holding up the sky. Oh, thank you. You won't regret this, I promise. She lunged across the desk to hug me, her hair smothering my face in a cloud of vanilla and entitlement. I didn't hug her back. When she pulled away, confusion flickered in her eyes. "Aren't you happy for me?" I stood, smoothing my skirt. "No," I said simply, "but I am free." The keys to the lakehouse landed on the desk with a metallic clatter. I didn't need them anymore. Dad's mouth opened, to protest, to apologise, maybe just to call me back. But what could he possibly say now? The deed was done, literally. I walked out without looking back. The door clicked shut behind me, softer than a heartbeat, louder than a gunshot. Let them have their precious house. I was already gone. The city didn't care about my past. That was the first thing I loved about it. The glorious anonymity of crowded sidewalks, of strangers who bumped into you without apology, of taxi horns that drowned out thoughts. No one here knew I was the discarded daughter, the afterthought sister. Here, I could be anyone. So I became someone fiercer. I rented a studio apartment with exposed brick and a fire escape that creaked when I sat on it at night, drinking cheap wine and watching the skyline pulse. The space was small enough that I could touch both walls if I stretched my arms wide, but it was mine. No Clara's leftover perfume clinging to the towels, no Dad's disapproving glances when I came home late. Just my books, stacked haphazardly on milk crates, my shoes kicked off by the door, my life finally unfolding without commentary. The real estate office hired me on a trial basis. "You're overqualified," Mr. Kowalski had said during the interview, squinting at my resume. I'd smiled. The new one I'd been practicing, all sharp edges and confidence. "Then I'll outperform your expectations." And I did. There was something delicious about helping clients find homes, real ones, not just structures with mortgages. I learned to read people quickly, the newlyweds who needed space to grow into each other, the divorcees craving fresh starts, the elderly couples downsizing but not downgrading. I became good at matching souls to spaces. Maybe because I'd spent so long feeling mismatched myself. Within a year, I'd brokered enough deals to afford a proper apartment. 2 bedrooms because I could. A balcony where I grew herbs that actually survived. A closet full of blazers that made me look like I'd always known what I was doing. The voicemail still came, of course. Mum's voice tight with forced cheer. "Just checking in." Dad's gruff, "Call your mother." Clara's dramatic sighs about wedding planning. I deleted them without listening all the way through. Then there were the emails, the ones I did read, not from family, but from the county clerk's office back home. Automated updates about property taxes, liens, ownership transfers. I might have signed away my share, but I'd kept myself on the mailing list, just in case. One afternoon, as rain streaked my office windows, an alert popped up. Change of ownership, Dawson Lake property. I clicked it open, and there it was. Clara's name, followed by Mark's, followed by a bank I'd never heard of. I leaned back in my chair, spinning my pen between my fingers. Somewhere across town, a couple was arguing over paint samples. A family was unpacking boxes in their first real home. A woman was signing papers that would change her life. I took a sip of coffee. It had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. The past was someone else's story now. Mine was just beginning. The lake house became Mark's playground the moment the ink dried. I heard the stories in fragments. A cousin's careless remark at a coffee shop, a real estate agent's gossip during an open house, the occasional social media post Clara forgot to block me from seeing. Each detail painted a picture more delicious than the last. That boathouse I'd loved, gutted and turned into a man cave with neon beer signs and a poker table that never saw a winning hand. The wraparound porch where I'd watched storms roll in, now littered with Mark's cigar butts and empty bourbon bottles. And the guest room, Mum's precious retirement suite, with its antique quilts and floral wallpaper, transformed into a makeshift gym where Mark's friends grunted over weights while Clara bit her tongue in the kitchen. The first crack appeared 6 months in. A midnight call from Mum that I let go to voicemail. "Emily, I don't know what to do. Mark invited some business associates to stay the weekend, and Clara says we can't visit." Her voice cracked on the last word. I saved the message, played it when I needed a smile. By summer, the updates grew richer. Dad's vintage Mustang, the one he'd never let me so much as sit in, borrowed by Mark for a Vegas trip and returned with a dented fender and unfamiliar lipstick on the passenger seat. The heirloom dining set sold at auction to cover renovations that never materialised. Clara's Instagram posts grew fewer, then stopped altogether, replaced by Mark's check-ins at various sports bars with people who all had the same dead-eyed grin. The final masterpiece came via a property alert, a second mortgage taken out against the house. The loan officer's name rang familiar. I'd gone to high school with his daughter. One discreet lunch later, I learned the truth. Mark had been using the property as collateral for failed investments. The lakehouse wasn't a home anymore. It was an ATM with a leaking roof. At family gatherings I didn't attend, they whispered about how Clara had changed, how her designer clothes hung looser, how she jumped when phones rang, how she'd started saying "we decided" when everyone knew she meant Mark once. The cage was gilded, but the lock clicked just the same. Sometimes, when the wind blew right, I could almost hear it, the echo of my mother's voice saying Clara needs the stability, as her golden child learned the weight of chains. I never checked the weather at the lake anymore, but I kept the foreclosure notices in a special folder, just in case. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I knew before looking it had to be them. No one else would dare interrupt the sacred silence of my apartment at that hour. The screen glowed with Mum's contact photo, a smiling shot I'd taken years ago at some forgettable family barbecue. Now it pulsed like a warning beacon against my dark bedroom wall. I let it ring out. The voicemail notification appeared instantly. They must have been desperate. Mum never left messages on the first try, always 3 polite attempts, spaced exactly 7 minutes apart before permitting herself to speak into the void. This breach of protocol intrigued me enough to press play before coffee the next morning. Her voice emerged strained through the speaker, the cultured vowels cracking at the edges. "Emily, it's Mum. I know it's late, but..." A pause filled with swallowed pride. "We need to talk about Clara. Mark has, well, there's been some difficulties." I nearly dropped my mug. Difficulties. That carefully sanitized word carried more weight than any scream. In our family lexicon, it covered everything from bankruptcy scandals to that time Uncle Roger accidentally set the garage on fire during his midlife crisis. The message continued, each syllable more forced than the last. "He's taken out loans against the house. Your father tried to reason with him, but..." A muffled sound, possibly Dad swearing in the background. "Perhaps you could speak to Clara? She listens to you?" The lie hung so thick I could taste it. Clara had never listened to me in her life. I saved the recording under a new folder labelled Karma and went about my day. By noon, 3 more calls came in, all from Dad's number, all unanswered. The texts started around 3 p.m. "We're worried about your sister. This isn't like her. Family sticks together." The last one almost made me laugh aloud in the middle of showing a penthouse to tech millionaires. I waited until their Tesla pulled away before responding. Funny how that only applies when it's convenient. The typing bubbles appeared immediately. Disappeared. Reappeared. Finally, "Your mother's crying." I pictured them in that McMansion of theirs, Mum dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, Dad red-faced and sputtering into his scotch. 2 people who'd built their lives on selective blindness, now forced to see what happened when golden children tarnish. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have said so many things, that I'd warned them, that they'd made their bed, that Clara's suffering should taste sweet after all these years. Instead, I typed 2 words and turned off my phone. "Not my problem." The silence afterward felt cleaner somehow, like pulling a splinter that had festered too long. That night, I opened a bottle of wine I could actually afford now, and toasted the cracks spreading through their perfect facade. Somewhere across town, a couple signed papers for their dream home. Somewhere farther away, a lakehouse stood half empty, its walls echoing with arguments no one could smooth over anymore. And in my quiet apartment, the phone stayed dark. Just how I liked it. The foreclosure notice arrived in my inbox on a rainy Thursday morning, sandwiched between a coffee order confirmation and a newsletter I never read. The subject line, Dawson Property, Final Notice, glowed on my screen like a neon sign in the fog. I clicked it with the detached curiosity of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. Details unfolded in crisp legal jargon. Unpaid debts, liens piling up like dirty dishes, a final auction date set for 30 days out. The bank's logo stared back at me, impersonal and unfeeling. No frantic cover letter from Clara, no desperate plea from our parents, just cold, hard bureaucracy doing what it did best. I printed it out. The paper felt strangely heavy between my fingers, the ink slightly raised where the printer had laid it down too thick. This single sheet represented everything they'd sacrificed me for. Clara's stability, the family legacy, Mark's hollow promises, reduced to a case number and a list of violations. I pinned it to my office corkboard next to a listing for a luxury penthouse, the contrast almost poetic. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered out of morbid curiosity. "Emily? It's me." Clara's voice sounded foreign, stripped of its usual honeyed confidence. A baby cried in the background, the sound sharp and unfamiliar. I said nothing. "Look, I know you hate me." "I don't." The truth slipped out before I could stop it. "Hate requires energy. You don't get that from me anymore." Silence, then a wet sniffle. "We're losing the house." The words should have tasted sweet. Instead, they sat on my tongue like ash. I stared at the foreclosure notice, at the date circled in red. "I know." Another pause. The baby's cries escalated. "Aren't you going to say I told you so?" I leaned back in my chair, watching rain streak my office windows. What would be the point? You never listened before. A door slammed on her end. Mark's voice shouted something indistinct. Clara's breath hitched, a sound I'd never heard from her in 30 years of shared history. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. And there it was, the moment I'd fantasized about since childhood. My perfect sister, broken and begging. The script called for vengeance, for rubbing her nose in the mess she'd made. But the strange thing? I felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, just the quiet understanding that some fires burned too hot to stand near. "Figure it out," I said softly, like I had to. The line went dead before she could reply. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. A cab splashed through a puddle, sending a businessman jumping back with a curse. Normal life rolling forward without pause. I took the foreclosure notice down from my board, folded it neatly, and tucked it into my desk drawer. Not as a trophy, not as proof, just as a reminder that no cage, no matter how golden, stays locked forever. They arrived unannounced on a Sunday morning, their Lexus idling crookedly outside my building like a wounded animal. Through the peephole, I watched them fidget. Mum adjusting the same pearl necklace she'd worn to Clara's wedding, Dad's knuckles whitening around a bakery box of Danishes he'd never have bought for himself. The sight was so absurd I almost didn't answer. Almost. The door swung open to reveal two people who looked like my parents, but carried themselves like strangers. Dad's polo shirt hung loose where his belly used to be. Mum's signature red lipstick had bled into fine lines around her mouth. The bakery box trembled between them. "We were in the neighbourhood," Mum lied. I leaned against the doorframe, barefoot in yesterday's sweats. "Try again." Dad's jaw worked silently before he spat it out. "Clara's husband took out a second mortgage." 3rd, actually. I crossed my arms. But who's counting? The box slipped slightly in Dad's grip. They hadn't known. Mum's manicured fingers flew to her throat. You knew about this? I make it my business to know things. I stepped aside just enough to let them interpret it as an invitation. Like how Mark's business trip to Miami last month was at a casino, or how the investment group he joined is just his frat brothers funneling money into a fake tech startup. They shuffled into my apartment like convicts entering a courtroom. Dad's gaze snagged on my framed real estate licenses, while Mum pretended not to notice the wine stain on my sofa. The Danishes landed on my kitchen counter with a thud, the cellophane squeaking under Dad's grip. "We need your help," he ground out. I poured myself coffee, deliberately not offering any. "Help with what? You got exactly what you wanted. Clara got the house, the husband, the perfect little life." "She's miserable," Mum's voice cracked. The mug warmed my palms. "And?" Dad slammed a hand on the counter. "Damn it, Emily, she's your sister." "No." I set the mug down with deliberate calm. "She's your daughter. You made that abundantly clear every time you chose her. Now, you don't get to act shocked when the golden child turned out to be made of tinfoil." Mum made a wounded noise. Dad's face purpled. But neither could muster a rebuttal. What could they say? That they hadn't spent decades handing Clara everything on a silver platter? That they hadn't rewritten every rule to suit her? The silence stretched until it became its own answer. I opened the bakery box. The Danishes were Clara's favourite, almond cream with raspberry glaze. The irony was almost poetic. "Here's what's going to happen." I plucked one out, taking a bite. "You're going to leave. You're going to deal with the mess you helped create. And you're never going to show up here again, expecting me to clean up after Clara." Mum's tears finally spilled over. "We miss our family." "You had one." I wiped powdered sugar from my fingers. "You just forgot to include me in it." The door clicked shut behind them with satisfying finality. Through the window, I watched Dad hurl the Danishes into a trash can before peeling out of the parking lot. Somewhere across town, Clara was probably crying to Mark about unfair parents. Somewhere farther away, a bank was preparing to seize a lakehouse. And in my quiet kitchen, the coffee had gone cold. But for the first time in years, the air felt clean. The sheriff's notice was posted on the lakehouse door with brutal efficiency. A bright orange sticker slapped across the stained oak like a brand. I only knew because the realtor handling the bank sale sent me photos, her email chirpy with professional detachment. "Thought you might want first look before listing." The images loaded slowly on my phone, the once manicured lawn now patchy with neglect, the porch swing hanging by one rusted chain, and, through the grimy living room window, the shadowy outline of furniture left behind in haste. Clara hadn't even bothered to take the curtains. I zoomed in on the eviction notice, the dates and legalese crisp despite the peeling tape. 30 days to vacate. A lifetime of entitlement reduced to 4 weeks of scrambling. Somewhere in that house, under layers of Mark's bad decisions and Clara's willful blindness, were probably still traces of me. A childhood initial carved into the boathouse beam. The closet where I'd hidden during thunderstorms. The exact spot on the dock where I learned the water was deepest. All of it now bank property. My finger hovered over the reply button. I could have asked the realtor to save me the carved initial, could have driven up one last time to stand in the empty shell of what used to be mine. Could have... I deleted the email instead. Let the new owners find the ghosts. Let Clara explain to her kids why they couldn't visit Grandma's lake house anymore. Let my parents choke on the realization that their sacrifice had bought Clara exactly nothing in the end. The past was just rotting wood and broken promises now. I had better things to build. They came in winter when the cold made everything brittle. I spotted them from my balcony first. 2 hunched figures trudging through the snow in my building's courtyard, Mum's Burberry scarf flapping like a surrender flag. Dad's shoulders squared in that stubborn way that meant he'd rather be anywhere else. They looked small against the steel and glass backdrop of my world, out of place as relics in a museum. The intercom buzzed 3 times before I answered. "Emily?" Mum's voice crackled through the speaker, tinny with false cheer. "We were just—" I pressed the door release before she could finish the lie. They took the elevator up in silence. I knew because I watched them on the security feed. Mum fussing with her hair, Dad glaring at his reflection in the polished doors. When the chime announced their arrival, I didn't move to greet them. Just waited, arms crossed, as the hesitant knocks echoed. The door swung open to reveal 2 strangers wearing my parents' faces. Mum thrust forward a tattered photo album like a shield. "We found these when packing up the attic. Look, you and Clara at the lake when you were 6. The plastic-covered pages smelled of mildew and nostalgia. There I was, gap-toothed and grinning in a hand-me-down swimsuit. Clara, pristine in matching ruffles, already learning to angle herself toward the camera. I let the album dangle between us. "What do you want?" Dad cleared his throat. "Can we at least sit down?" My apartment offered no cosy armchairs for heart-to-hearts, just sleek, modular furniture that discouraged lingering. They perched on the edge of my sofa like birds on a power line while I remained standing. Mum's fingers pleated her skirt. "Clara's filing for divorce." The words hung between us, neither revelation nor surprise. I studied a chip in my nail polish. "And?" "She's moving back in with us." Dad's voice carried the weight of a life sentence. "With the kids." I almost laughed. The lakehouse gone, the golden marriage collapsed, and now their retirement would be spent raising Clara's children in the same house where they'd failed to raise us equally. Poetry didn't get more perfect. Mum's eyes welled up. "We thought maybe you could talk to her?" "Why?" I tilted my head. "So she can ignore me like you taught her to?" Dad surged to his feet, the way he always did when cornered. "Damn it, Emily, when will you stop punishing us?" The album slipped from Mum's lap, photos scattering across my hardwood floors. We all stared at the images frozen in time. Birthday parties where Clara blew out my candles, vacations where I carried my own luggage, Christmases where my gifts were always practical while hers sparkled. I crouched to gather the memories, handing them back without looking up. "I'm not punishing you, I'm just finally treating you the way you always treated me." Silence. Outside, snow began dusting the skyline. Somewhere in the city, Clara was probably crying to some stranger about unfair life was. Somewhere farther away, a new family was making memories in a house by the water. And here, in this quiet moment, heavy with all the words we'd never said, my parents finally understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a goodbye. I held the door open. They left without looking back. The package arrived 6 months later, postmarked from their retirement community. Heavy, awkwardly shaped, wrapped in the kind of brown paper my mother used to save from department store purchases. I let it sit on my kitchen counter for 3 days, sipping coffee around it like it might detonate. When I finally slit the tape, a cascade of familiar items spilled out. My 5th grade spelling bee ribbon. 2nd place, Clara had won. The chipped mug I'd made at summer camp. Every report card with its chorus of, "Emily could apply herself more." At the bottom lay Dad's pocket watch, the one Grandpa had given him when he turned 40. The engraving on the back, "To my son," glinted dully in the morning light. No note, just artifacts from a war they'd only now realised they'd lost. I poured a whiskey at noon, the good single malt I saved for closings, and spread the items across my dining table. Each piece carried the weight of a different betrayal. The time Mum forgot to pick me up from piano recitals for 3 weeks straight, the way Dad always asked if Clara needed money, but reminded me to be financially responsible. The watch in particular made me laugh. his most prized possession, offered now like a peace treaty when all the battles were over. My phone buzzed with a call from Clara. I let it go to voicemail, then played it on speaker while running my thumb over the watch's cracked leather band. "They're giving you Grandpa's watch." Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying. "After everything I've lost, they're rewarding you for abandoning us." The recording ended. I took another sip of whiskey, savouring the burn. She called back immediately. This time, I answered. "You want the truth?" I didn't wait for her reply. "They're not rewarding me. They're punishing themselves." Silence. Then a wet sniff. "For what?" The simplicity of the question nearly undid me. Clara had lived 35 years at the centre of their universe and still didn't understand the gravity of their orbit. "For choosing wrong," I said softly, "for loving you more, and ending up with nothing to show for it." The line went dead. I boxed up the artifacts the next morning, all but the watch. That I kept, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Some truths don't need to be spoken to be felt. The return label bore Dad's shaky handwriting. The address smudged where he'd pressed too hard. I crossed it out and wrote Clara's instead. Let her sort through the wreckage for once. As for the watch, I dropped it in a charity bin outside my building. Some truths are too heavy to carry. The receipt fluttered to the pavement, the ink already fading in the sun. I sold the penthouse on a Tuesday. The buyers, a young couple with matching wedding bands and hopeful eyes, gushed over the floor-to-ceiling windows, the way the city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds at night. The woman paused at my balcony, fingertips brushing the railing where I'd stood so many evenings with a glass of wine, watching storms roll in. "It feels like a fresh start," she breathed. I didn't tell her that's exactly what it had been for me. Just handed over the keys and a bottle of chilled champagne with a smile. Some gifts don't need explanation. My new place was smaller, a restored loft in the arts district with exposed beams and history in the brickwork. The movers left the last box, labelled Misk in Sharpie, by the fireplace as the sunset painted the walls gold. Inside were the only relics I'd kept: my first real estate licence, a photo of Grandma Rose who'd left me the lakehouse share all those years ago, and a single page torn from a legal pad. "Sign here," it said in Dad's handwriting. I fed it to the flames and opened a window to let the ashes dance out into the twilight. Clara's divorce finalised the week I moved in. I heard through the grapevine, our old paediatrician's wife of all people, that she'd taken the kids and moved into our parents' guest house. The irony wasn't lost on me. The golden child reduced to living in the same cramped quarters where they'd once stored holiday decorations and my forgotten art projects. Mum sent one last email. "We're selling the piano to make room for the twins' bunk beds," as if I'd care about the Steinway Clara had played so beautifully, and I'd never been allowed to touch. I marked it as spam. The loft's bare walls echoed as I uncorked a bottle of red, the good stuff I used to save for imaginary occasions. Tonight was occasion enough. I drank straight from the bottle as I painted the accent wall, the colour of storm clouds, the brushstrokes messy and mine alone. Somewhere across town, the penthouse's new owners were probably christening their balcony with that champagne. Somewhere farther away, my parents were tucking Clara's children into beds that would always smell faintly of mothballs and regret. And here, in this raw space smelling of acrylic and possibility, I spread a drop cloth on the unfinished hardwood and slept under the stars visible through the skylight. The phone stayed silent. The past stayed where it belonged. Morning would come when it came. For the first time in my life, I was in no rush to meet it.